Where did you get your idea for the short story, The Lawnmower Man?
Oh, that's the oldest story in Night Shift. I shouldn't admit this, but I wrote that story when I was 15. And it sat around for a long time because it was just too grisly for anybody to do anything with. This is a guy, it's about a guy, if you haven't read it, who's really lazy, and he just sort of sits around, and the grass grows and the grass grows, and he sees an ad in the paper that says, "I'll mow your lawn." And the guy comes over, and he has a remote control lawnmower and takes off all his clothes and runs along after the lawnmower, eats the grass himself, and finally at the end performs a fertility rite on this guy in his suburban bird bath, kills him, does all this other stuff, and I don't remember where I got the idea.
Who are your favorite writers? Either writers you enjoy reading or writers whose styles you've tried to emulate. And also, what is your favorite of your books or short stories?
Well, I have a special cold spot in my heart for Salem's Lot, I think. Thank you. I like it because I come from a small town, and to me, it seems to symbolize a lot of the small town virtues that I remember from my childhood, when there really were old guys that sat around a pickle barrel and told stories, and where that place was, that real place, is now a dairy treat, which to me says something very fundamental about what's happened in the country. And I don't want to get all sentimental and corny, but there's something there about a vanishing part of rural society. As for the writers that I read or did read or who might have influenced me, I think that the really important ones for me were Ray Bradbury and a guy named Richard Matheson. Sure, yeah. They're not here, but, I'll tell them you clap. Maybe they are here. One of the things about Bradbury and Matheson was that for years we'd had this idea that horror was something that existed in Europe with all those foreigners. Anything could happen with those guys, those Poles and Transylvanians and Hungarians and all them people. That had never happened here, And so Frankenstein in England and the Orkney Islands, and Dracula in Transylvania, and even when he came over to England, that was England, that wasn't here, and they kicked his ass out anyway, But the idea that Bradbury started to write about in Matheson was that it could happen around here. It could happen down the street. There was a famous television series called The Twilight Zone, which traded on this idea. That the monsters could be anywhere. There was a Twilight Zone episode called The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. They were going to be around. They were going to come. They were going to be there. And the trend continues. A guy that I like very much is a young writer named Dennis Etchison, who's just written a story called The Late Shift, which is in a anthology called Dark Forces. I'm not trying to plug it, but it's there if you want it. Nice book. It costs too much, but everything does. The idea of this story is that some enterprising corporation has found a way to reanimate the dead. And what they're doing is going out, digging up dead bodies, reanimating them and putting them to work on the 11 to 7 shift in 7-Eleven stores and stop and goes. And if you've ever been in one at 3 o'clock, okay, they can say about 7 different things. Yes, no, I'm sorry, please pay before you use the pump, that kind of thing. So, and I think those are the people who influence me, but as far as who I read now, I read everybody. I think if you're going to write, that most writers are omnivorous readers, and if I were alone, and in a doctor's office or something like that, the lowest form of life is the National Geographic that even has the covers torn off. But you read it because you've got to have something, matchbook covers, learn to drive school, whatever it happens to be. So I like to read, and one of the things about reading a lot is that little by little you develop taste, whatever that is, and you're able to tell bad from good. Anything else? If you get fanny fatigue, I'll understand, but it sets in, everything freezes.
Hey, what do you say? How do you feel when they take your books and they make them into movies and they change them around? I mean, every movie is going to be different than the book, but how do you feel about it? Does it make you feel better, or what are they doing, or that type of thing,
Well, this is going to sound callous and hard, but I don't care. I don't care. And I'll tell you something. John Updike, I think, had the best comment on this. He said the ideal situation is when the filmmakers buy a book for a lot of money and then never make it at all. But beyond that, I think of books and movies as apples and oranges. And first of all, if it's a project that you're not involved with, you're in a no-lose situation. If they make a great movie, you can say, that was based on my material. If they make a lousy one, you can say, I didn't have anything to do with it. Okay? But beyond that, movies have very short lives. For instance, The Shining, there was anticipation, and mine was a part of it for about 3 years, about that picture. And finally it opened in New York and Los Angeles in May, and it had a playoff throughout the country this summer. It's now, you'd be hard-pressed to find a theater that was showing it first run, unless it's in Hohandle Corners, Iowa, or someplace like that. It'll probably be back next summer and do a run at the drive-ins. Then it'll be on cable TV. Then it'll be on network TV, and then it will disappear. Movies just simply have a very short life. I mean, that's a 2-year span I'm talking about. And hamsters, live longer than that. Even my kid's guinea pig has lived longer, and he never feeds the goddamn thing. But what I'm saying is that the movie will be gone. The book will still be in the library or the bookstore or whatever it is. Books live a long time. Shakespeare is still kicking around. It's been like 400 years. And I think that 50 years from now, hopefully some kid in a library will find that book in the stacks and pick it out and read it. He may never have heard of the movie. In fact, the chances are very slim that he never will have, but maybe it'll be something that he can use or something he can need.
And I just want to say that I'm in the middle of reading Night Shift, but the 2 stories, I'm about halfway through, but the 2 stories that stand out in my mind, and I couldn't help but think about them all night, was...
Good! That's good.
I Am the Doorway.
Oh.
Do you remember it?
Yeah, of course I remember it.
I'm the Doorway and...
Steve King's greatest hits.
Yeah. And The Boogeyman.
Oh, yeah, the
I mean, I used to keep my closet open, but no more.
Yeah, thank you. I was really afraid of that guy when I was a kid. Not that guy, the Boogeyman. That guy's bad, that Boogeyman, and I'm still afraid of him. But see, I can say that because of what I do for a living, whereas if you told somebody that, they might laugh. But in fact, probably they would because they'd be scared too, or even more scared. And I'm just sort of rambling. Yes?
I just want to thank you very much for everything that you've written.
Wow. That's
you have
great.
written. Seriously.
Thank you.
You have written the only books that I've stayed up all night for.
Ah,
For reals.
Wow,
But
thank you.
I heard a rumor that you had written a screenplay for The Stand, which in my opinion is the...
yeah, I've done that.
All right! That's what I wanted to hear.
The other half of the movie question is simply if you get involved, you get involved all the way. And for a long time, I've been busy raising kids and writing books and growing gardens and, sort of goofing around with my motorcycle and one thing and another. And finally, George Romero came to me and said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, let's see if we can't, scare people really badly. Get them in a movie theater, close the doors, and scare the hell out of them. Get them so they'll literally be crawling out of the theater with jujubes in their hair, things, crawling under the seat, that kind of thing. And his eyes lit up, and it was like coming home. It was very warm thing. So we're starting production next April on a movie called Creepshow, which is going to be sort of the forerunner to The Stand, and then we'll get going on the other one. I think it's going to be okay. Yeah.
Out of all the stories that you've written and which do you feel is the most scariest character to write about? I mean, is it a monster, or is it an ordinary person, or?
Gee, I don't think I've ever been asked that one before. If I had to say who I thought was the scariest person I'd ever written about, I'd say Jack Torrance in The Shining. Because I love that guy, and I think one of the things that was scary about him is that you can love him and you see him going bad, and I think that we can talk about monsters and demons and boogeymen, but one of the things we're all familiar with is the good guy who after a while gets off the rails, and you see it happening, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. So I would say, not only for that reason, but because there's enough of me in him to make me think, well, you know, I could have gone a different route, and I would have been there, maybe not in the Overlook, but so he scares me.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Many of your characters have very special or unusual mental powers. Do you feel that you have any special or unusual mental powers?
Only when I've had 5 or 6. Then I feel really, really mental. No, I don't think so. And some people will say, well, do you believe the kind of stuff that you write about? And the answer is almost. I want to, and yet at the same time, I think that you have to be very hard-headed and pragmatic about it. I would believe it if I'd ever seen a ghost or that sort of thing. And yet at the same time, I think we've all had the experience of not thinking about, you know, Aunt Molly for, you know, 3 or 4 years, and then you'll be thinking about her and the phone will ring and it will be her, or you'll have a flash of something that's going to happen. And so I suspect that something is going on there, but that it's probably uncontrollable in the sense that you're not able to actually harness it the way some of the characters in the books do. Yeah.
Where, in your opinion, does suspense topple over into horror? You keep classifying yourself as writing horror stories, and to me, I found suspense in The Shining. I found suspense in The Stand and Dead Zone, and where do you consider the horror in those stories?
Well, actually, other people say that, so I go along. I'm a nice guy. I think that suspense is the American novel. You know, Moby Dick is whether or not, you know, Ahab will get the whale or the whale will get Ahab. The Scarlet Letter is a suspense novel. So I think of suspense as really what it's all about, and I've always wanted to do that, but I think of suspense sort of as methadone and horror as heroin. You know, this is the stuff where you really go out and get somebody, and of course, one of the things, I really only think I've done 2 out-and-out horror novels, The Shining and Salem's Lot, but there's some stuff coming along. It's pretty grisly.
I think I'd have to put Carrie in that horror vein.
Yeah,
but
I
the
think
others,
Carrie's a horror story.
And
yeah.
Night Shift, all of Night Shift.
Well, all right. Yeah.
A lot of your stories are based on psychological powers, and not much of them have been really researched, to my knowledge. And I was wondering, where do you get most of your information, like the girl's power with pyrokinesis and telekinesis? And
Well, I'm going to tell you the truth. The National Enquirer. That's not actually 100% true. You know, the Enquirer is just one of these things that if you're in the newsstand, it jumps right out at you. It's not as good as it used to be. It used to be, you know, like mom kills kids and feeds them to dogs, you know, and that sort of thing. They've lapsed a lot now, but every now and then there'll be this endearing return to the old Enquirer, like the photo of Elvis in his coffin and that sort of thing. But they've always got stories, you know, of these weird things about flying saucers and pyrokinesis. And in a lot of cases, there's things that I had read about a long, long time ago. You'll sometimes get a buzz from the Enquirer. I think one of the things that was going when I got the idea of the Dead Zone was constantly being assaulted in the supermarket by the name Jeannie Dixon. You know, she's the one who predicts, she predicted Carter was going to win, and this sort of thing. And I thought to myself, wouldn't it be interesting if somebody could really do that? And if they could, would it be this kind of National Enquirer kind of story, or would it be something a lot more interesting? And as it turned out, I think it was more interesting at least than an Enquirer story. But with pyrokinesis, there have been cases reported for hundreds of years. And a lot of this comes from, I think that writers of so-called literature, you know, often what they say when they sit down to write is, what next? You know, if the academic and his alcoholic wife get a divorce, what next? You know, they say, well, if Rabbit Angstrom does this, well, what's going to happen next? You know, all of this. Whereas the writer of popular fiction often says, what if? And to me, it's a kid thing to do. I can't believe that I get paid for doing it even now, because you just sit down and you play games, really. I mean, the idea is like this bright toy, and you push it across the floor and see if it goes wacka wacka or rum rum or what it does, and kick it over and see if it will set itself up again. And it's wonderful, wonderful way to earn a living. I love it. I recommend it to anybody. Yeah.
Okay, I think it's fantastic, that you've had Carrie and Salem's Lot and the others. But for the sake of the aspiring authors and everybody else out here, have there been any rejection slips?
Oh, not too many. 60 short story rejections and 4 complete novels before Carrie. Anybody, this is like playing the piano, or you begin with your fingering exercises and you work it up, and little by little you get better and better. But I should point out also that if you have talent and you genuinely love what you're doing, if you love to play the piano, then the time practicing and doing scales or playing My Dog Has Fleas, They Bite His Knees, or whatever it happens to be, that time goes by fast. But if you're a kid who doesn't have any natural aptitude for the piano, and your mother just says you're going to play the piano, so sit there and practice. You sit there and the minutes turn into hours, and the metronome, and you're looking out the window and seeing kids that are playing baseball, which you could be doing. Whereas if you really like it, the time passes, and instead of practicing for an hour, you may practice an hour and a half. There was never really a time when I was getting those rejection slips that I felt rejected. I felt as though, well, this doesn't work here, we'll try it somewhere else. And in the meantime, I'd be deep in something else. And eventually, I began to sell some of the stuff, and then a little bit more. And finally, I'm able to make my living at it, which is a very sort of civilized thing to do. I sometimes tell people that I taught school 2 years and then retired, which is nice. Well, yeah.
Well, you mentioned you taught school for 2 years and what have you. A lot of your characters have common backgrounds. Glenn Bateman, for instance, was a school teacher. Jack Torrance, Johnny Smith, on and on. A lot of these things are very intriguing, as if there were some master plan encompassing all of these great things that you've done. But
they all went to school at the same place, too.
True, right. One thing that
University of Georgia in Athens.
That brings up one thing that I'm really curious about, and that is exactly, well, Jerusalem's Lot. There was a short story, The Keeper of the Worm. Then it came up again, One for the Road, Vampires. Salem's Lot, I assume, is an abbreviation of Jerusalem's Lot, of course. And it comes up again in the Dead Zone, the hospital that Johnny Smith's mother died, what have you. I'm sure you know it better than I. But anyway, what in your mind, who lives in Jerusalem's Lot? Where is it? What? Why does it keep coming up?
Well, I'm going to write a sequel to the novel next summer, and I think that your questions will be answered then. But I'll tell you, well, I don't want total paralysis of the butt to set in, but let me just tell you how that book happened to be written in the first place. When I was in college, I spent a summer working at the University of Maine Library on a work-study program, and the only place I could find to live since the dorms were closed was a rooming house, which turns out to be Eva Miller's rooms in the novel. And there were a lot of old guys that lived there, and they would, cook their beans at night and go out drinking at night. I used to go out drinking with a guy named Weasel Boudreau, who became Weasel Craig in the book. And he and I would go down to the small village, Old Town. They had a bar that was called the Bucket of Blood. And up from the bar was a laundromat, and we would flip to see who would go and change the clothes over while the other one continued to get paralytic in this little bar. And Weasel was about 75, and I lost the toss and went to change the clothes from wash to dry, came back, and he'd picked up a lady who was 84. Took her back with him that night, too, as a matter of fact. They both got in on the same side, and my car went like that. But while I was living there that summer, a young fellow who also lived there asked me if I wanted to go over to New Hampshire and join the Church of the Universal Life, which is Kirby T. Hensley's church, and he said there was going to be a lot of good food to eat, and there was going to be some dope to smoke, and there was a lake where you could go swimming and all this stuff. And it sounded great, so I said, okay. And we went over, and it was on summer solstice, 1969, and we set out in the middle of the day going west, across Maine, across New Hampshire, finally into Vermont. And at this time, it was about 9 o'clock at night. The sun still wasn't completely down. And we were going through what they call a notch. And across the way, and you know, this is like that, you could see a town. And you couldn't see too much. You could see the buildings and this kind of haze of pine trees. And he said, do you see that town? And I said, well, I see some buildings. And he said, that town is called Jeremiah's Lot. And in 1905 or 6, everybody disappeared. And he said people went in because they missed their relatives, and beds were turned down for supper. Food was on stoves. The fires had gone out of the stoves. The food had cooked on. In the little store, everybody was gone, but there was still money in the cash register. All of these things, everybody disappeared. They were never found again, and the town is deserted to this day, you know, that thing. And it's something you would dismiss at another time, but it was the right time of night, and things felt right, and there's something about looking at those buildings. And the thing kind of stuck in my mind, and finally I got a Vermont atlas. This was about 6 months later, and sure enough, the town was mentioned in there. And I hunted down a few references that said people did disappear, and that became the novel. That was kind of a dull story, but yes.
This may sound a little long-winded, so I hope you'll bear with me.
Okay, I'll bear with you.
I get the feeling that writers are like doctors, and people come up to them at cocktail parties and they say, hey, wow, I love you, I've read everything you've ever written, and by the way, I just happen to be a writer myself, and I've got something I want you to read. That's not what I'm up here for. I wanted to let you know that first.
Okay.
My question is this.
All right.
In Salem's Lot, Ben says that he feels that his novels are like children, like weak children, and if you handle them too much, they're going to die.
Mm-hmm.
And I have that feeling about everything I write. How do you get over it?
Well, sooner or later something lives. I don't know how to put it any better. A lot of them die at first, and you're glad that they're not children. But I think it's just a process of continuing on to try and get better and to breed stronger children, and that does happen after a time. How about two more, because my voice is going to pack up. I'm going to sign some autographs later if you have something that you wanted, if you had a book that you wanted signed or something like that. I don't know how long I'm going to stay if my throat closes up entirely, but we'll do what we can. But two more questions, I think, and then
Will you autograph my body somewhere? No, just teasing.
I'll autograph it everywhere.
No,
yes.
The guy in the brown shirt just happens to have ESP. He stole my question, but I have something else to ask you. The politician in The Dead Zone, Greg Stilson.
Greg Stilson.
Did you know someone like that, or where did you come up with him? He's kind of strange.
He wasn't any one politician. He was sort of a lot of politicians that at that time and since that time, I think we've seen a lot of kind of disturbing things about some of our politicians. And I'm not just talking about Abscam or Watergate, but a lot of kind of disturbing things. He was based primarily on Adolf Hitler, of course. And this is, I hope nobody throws a brick at me for this, but I think beyond that, if there was a physical type, an American type that I tried to fix on, it was a guy named Frank Rizzo, who is from Philadelphia, who's a hard ass. He really is. And yet at the same time, he's kind of an ominous buffoon. You laugh, but at the same time, you hope he won't get too close. Yes, last question here.
Have you written anything that you felt was too evil to publish?
Well, I wrote something 2 years ago that I put away. And I won't say that I'll never publish it, but it was an idea that seemed very good at the time, and somehow seemed to turn a corner that I didn't like and to get very painful and very dark. It was a hard book to finish. It's in first draft, and I put it away because I didn't want to go back and experience that all again. When I was doing The Shining, I wrote a scene into it that I wasn't aware of beforehand that I was going to write, where Danny Torrance goes into a room and there's a dead woman in a tub. And she comes out and gets him, and by the time I finished that scene, I was kind of drenched in sweat and very, very glad it was over. And when it came time to rewrite the book, I was going along and working pretty well, and one day I thought 5 more days and the woman in the tub. And then it really started to bother me. And I had 3 more days and the woman in the tub. And then it was 1 more day, and then it was today, the woman in the tub. And I was tight, and kind of shaky, and at the same time aware that the reason I was feeling those things was knowledge in here that if I wanted to, I could re-experience that entire thing again, deepen it, make it even worse. And I did that to the best of my ability. And this book is like that all the way through. And I don't want to go through it again. So what I've done is not to burn it or destroy it or anything, but I've got a bunch of work that's in progress, and I just keep putting this at the end of the line. And I figure, when it's my turn to kick it, my relatives can decide what to do with it, and I won't have to hassle it. Thank you very much.